Hey guys, welcome to another episode where Stephanie and I are going to talk about direct to patient, direct to consumer. What is the difference? Why does it matter? And, because no one's talking about this, and I feel like not enough people have heard about this, but the Trump administration and the changes they're making, because no one's talking about that. It's such a quiet, silent topic that no one's discussing. But essentially, they came out and talked about this most favored nation status. What does that actually mean? How does this apply to what the entire industry is going through? But before we get started, Stephanie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. And thank you, Darshan. Thanks for joining me today. This is going to be an interesting topic, I think. I'm Stephanie Trunk. I'm a partner at Errant Fox Schiff outside of Washington, D.C. And I spend a lot of my time on kind of the CMS side of things related to drugs. And Darshan, of course, spends his time on the FDA side of things related to all things drugs. So,
FDA, but one of the things we're going to talk about is it's not just the FDA.
it's not.
You talk about CMS, but I literally list out on my presentation I'm doing about 7 different agencies that are impacted with DTP, which is
For
going to be
sure.
crazy. Actually, now that I think about it, 8, but that's a different discussion. My name is Darshan Kulkarni. I'm principal attorney at the Kulkarni law firm. We focus on FDA regulatory matters, how they connect with life sciences companies and their service providers, whether we're talking about doctors, patients, telemedicine companies, pharmacies, anything FDA regulated, and that's where we come out. Today's topic is DTC versus DTP. I'm going to start off by just maybe introducing the concept, distinguishing it from what we think of as traditional direct to consumer, and build from there. So direct to consumer advertising, for those people who don't know, is those ads that you see on TV going, talk to your doctor if this drug is right for you. And everyone's seen them. The US loves them because we're one of the only countries outside New Zealand that allows this to happen. The good news is that a lot of drug companies go, this is how I can raise the likelihood of me making my money back, maybe even making a little bit of a profit. Contrary to what people think, it's not as easy to make a profit as people might believe. That's what DTC gives you. However, I was joking when I said people love that because the Trump administration is saying we want to repeal the ability to have direct to consumer advertising. I'll give you my opinion, Stephanie. You can riff off of that as well. But I would go, that's not happening. It's a First Amendment rights issue. The fact is that whether or not you like it, you can't stop speech just because you don't like it, especially in the context of scientific discussion. Now, the question is that scientific discussion could just be commercial speech? But even then, you can't just stop commercial speech you don't like. But that'd be my first initial jump off point. What is your take on it, Stephanie?
I actually find it interesting that it comes up from President Trump and the administration as kind of an area of focus for reform because he's so focused on, the administration so focused on the economics of drugs and this idea that we pay too much for drugs, especially compared to foreign countries. And it just begs the question to me what he thinks the tie in from advertising is to drug price. And perhaps it is true that, we see so many ads, it's just an explosion. If you watch the news, I feel like if you watch the news in the morning or the evening, that's prime time for these ads. And, I certainly do think it can influence a patient going into their doctor and saying, hey, I saw this ad. Is that right for me? And of course, we've seen the explosion of putting the copay card terms and conditions on these ads. And perhaps that is a tie in to allowing prices to get higher without patients feeling it. But I don't quite see the one-to-one translation of let's go after DTC ads that's going to help bring down prices. I don't quite see that link. So I've always kind of found it curious because even under the first Trump administration, he was kind of down on the DTC ads. And also keep in mind that other countries don't have them. So yeah, I'm not so sure that just not having them lowers drug prices.
I think there are 2 different reasons. I think DTC ads get a lot
DTC
of
ads.
hate, if you will. And the argument is that there's so much money being spent on drug advertisements that could be better redirected
Mm-hmm.
to clinical research, to patient access, to just lowering the price of drugs. So the assertion is not we're not innovative. The assertion is not that we're not using money towards helping things. It's the fact that you're wasting money, and that wasted money is now a cost that the patient needs to bear.
Yeah.
And and I'm not sure I agree with that because and the current Trump administration is talking about this, and it's going to come up in this most favored nation status argument because they're going to come out. They're coming out and saying, you know what, we are effectively subsidizing the cost of care across the world because we're taking on the price of drugs. So I read this, I think, in one of the executive orders. I'm not sure I believe the numbers, but let's assume they're true for a second. The assertion is that we're 5% of the world's population, but carry 75% of the cost. Um, and I've always struggled with, is that really true? But if it is, there's no argument, I don't think, either from Stephanie or from myself, that the cost of drugs is too high. The question is, how do you address that cost of drugs? And is DTP, DTC, CMS, or any of those the right agencies? Or is there more of a network effect? Whether we're talking about PBMs, whether we're talking about pharma companies, whether we're talking about healthcare providers, all of whom are contributing towards the rising cost of healthcare. And how do you bring that down cohesively and collaboratively? And DTP is allegedly one of those answers in that
Yeah, and I feel
problem.
like you've just summarized the debate about the executive order that we got. I'm calling it the Mother's Day executive order because it came out the day after Mother's Day, and they announced that they were going to be putting it out on Mother's Day. But I think that that is the debate that between that EO and the recent kind of pharma campaign that really is looking to more of middlemen, whether it's PBMs or others, taking a piece of kind of taking a piece of the pie as it moves through the chain, and that really those fees and that little those rebating practices are what really is resulting in higher drug prices. So you've kind of summarized it nicely. And again, I'm with you. I don't know if that statistics are really accurate. The 5% of the world is carrying the rest of the world in terms of drug development and costs, but it's certainly worthy of a conversation for sure.
Absolutely. I have a question for you. From a drug cost standpoint, what do you think are the big levers that are affecting drug prices? And can one of the big arguments that you and I saw in the last Trump administration was let's put the price of drugs on drug ads because then you know what you're
Yeah.
paying for. I think that died down a little bit, but would
Yes.
that have affected anything based on what you see?
No. Yeah, and I mean this is a great question, and we could spend days talking about it. But it's many things, and I think it depends on what drug we're talking about too, because it can be sure it's recouping development costs in many instances, right? It's what is the competition? What's going on in this with our suppliers? Can I get API? Can I get we see that with the sterile injectables, right? We end up with shortages because there's facilities, but they can't get API, or there's been so much pressure on price to drop too low that it goes back up when suppliers have to come back into the market. So there's a lot of dynamic, and it's not just, oh, I have a GLP-1 drug that I need to recoup all my research and development costs for, and some of it's profitability and funding additional research and initiatives, because it's not, oh, I brought one drug to market, I'm done. So I think it's hard to have a conversation about drug pricing in the abstract without thinking about the class, and whether and whether you're dealing with a class with lots of generics and lots of alternatives, or we're dealing with a complete rare disease that's completely novel, because they're different questions, I think. But tying into the EO, what kind of led us to this conversation is this idea, as Darshan pointed out, that the administration wants to somehow negotiate pricing, and we don't know what context that's in. If you read the EO, it doesn't say specific to Medicare or Medicaid or commercial, but they want to somehow bring manufacturers to the table, have them either agree to some sort of pricing that matches economies and countries that are more our counterparts in terms of economics. I would say that it's not every country, and that somehow that pricing will be offered to some population, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, commercial. And there was also this concept of maybe manufacturing offering direct to patient, or sometimes we'll call them cash pay. I think that's what they're getting to, cash pay programs at that price. From your lens, what was your read of that EO? And what do you see possibilities of that I mean, voluntarily, we see that all the time, right? Manufacturers of certain drugs do have cash pay programs. We see that with the GLP-1s. But what about across the board? And what are the considerations that when you're selling direct to patient? What's the issue spotting there, Darshan?
So let me start by maybe laying the foundation a little bit more about what happened and why we're getting to this MFN situation, the most favored nation status issue, from a cash pay perspective. So over the last several years, I'm a pharmacist by background. I have 20 years of experience as a pharmacist, 20 years of experience as a lawyer. So I tend to watch a lot of this space. What you land up seeing over and over and over again, especially in the pharmacy world, is this idea that a lot of pharmacies are shutting down. So Walgreens has announced that they're going to shut down a bunch of stores. CVS said they're going to pivot. They're going to shut down a bunch of stores. Rite Aid is in the middle of shutting down all of their stores, is what I read somewhere. So pharmacies are shutting down. The question was, is this being shut down because they're just inefficient, they're old, or, as I say it, because of the Amazonification of pharmacy, which is people are saying, I don't want to leave my house. I want maximum flexibility. I want my drug to be brought to my house because that's what Amazon's able to do. Why can't you? Now, the result of that was that my personal opinion is that pharmacies are having to pivot in a world where people are saying, I don't need your storefront. You don't need those costs. Bring the drug directly to me. The first people to capitalize on it, and I don't mean first literally, but I mean like one of the major groups to capitalize on it are the GLP-1s, like you just mentioned. There was so much of a need for this that there was a shortage for the GLP-1s. As a result of that, compounding pharmacies came in and said, we'll make it. So as any good entrepreneur does, people start filling in the gaps. And they said, you're at home. Why don't I connect you to my doctor? He will connect directly to the pharmacy and deliver the drug to you. Now, as of late last year, and that was a multi-billion-dollar industry for several years, both Lilly and Novo Nordisk simply couldn't keep up with the demand. As a result of that, when last year they came out and said, you know what, we can finally meet that demand. The shortage is over. And there are a bunch of lawsuits that are going on in that space. But the result of that was you now have a pharmaceutical company saying, wait a second, you guys did figure something out, which is how do I connect directly to the patient? And that's the distinction between so they basically want to follow exactly what these compounding pharmacies and these prescribers already figured out for the GLP-1s. They just said, instead of a compounding pharmacy making the drug, we'll continue to make the drug and we'll deliver it. So it's medication directly to the patient. And that they've now set up programs to enable that process. Whether we're talking about Lilly or Novo, and I forget which one. One of them created their own pharmacy, and the other one is partnering with some of the old players in pharmacy and saying, you guys already have the network, you guys sell it for us. That raises a bunch of questions, in my opinion. Number one, it raises the question of agency. If you are a pharmaceutical company and you're directing prescriptions to specific providers, are you worried about patient steering and therefore kickback issues? Are you now worried about things like, and this is a continuous problem that kept occurring, which is the telemedicine companies promote drugs in a way that's non-compliant. They're not doing fair balance or the like. Funny enough, Bob Califf, ex-head of the FDA, came out and said, we don't think we have jurisdiction over this. Every lawyer I know went, wait a second, you absolutely do. But that was their position. Bob Califf is too smart a person to have said that off the cuff. There was some kind of analysis that happened that makes him go, I'm worried about jurisdiction in some way. And there are multiple bills being considered in Congress right now that are trying to address or clarify that gap. Nevertheless, the point becomes, if you are a pharma company and your quote unquote agent, or the telemedicine company, if they're not your agent, promote something off label or promotes things in a way that are inappropriate, are you responsible? Because there are rules on influencers, there are rules on agency.
Right.
So would those say, why shouldn't those rules apply? You then have to worry about things like adulteration and misbranding. This idea that you're now sending the drug using the US Postal Service. Okay, as a pharmaceutical company, if you send drugs down the Postal Service, are you supposed to maintain tighter controls? Because a lot of these GLP-1s, for example, have to be refrigerated and they have to be controlled in a way that they don't go outside these temperatures. We've all heard the news that these Amazon drivers are constantly like thirsty because they don't have time for they're constantly sweating because it's so hot in where they are, and they aren't getting enough drinks of water, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that there are temperature fluctuations in their van. And is your drug now exposed to those temperature fluctuations? That raises all new questions. Privacy. How do you ensure that who keeps this data? Do you keep it as the pharma company? Do you now need to worry about HIPAA? Are you subject to HIPAA when they came through? Because theoretically, you have this concern that did they come to you for knowledge of the drug or for accessing the drug? If they came to you for knowledge of the drug, you're still subject to just the FDA, and you may not be subject to HIPAA in the same way. The moment they come to you for the actual treatment, you might be subject to HIPAA. And then there are like 8 different types of privacy, and what do you need to worry about in specific instances? FTC rules, things like nagging, shaming, zuckering, for those people who don't know, I love that word, sneaking, disguised ads, forced actions, all of which are things that the FTC has called out in subscription services, for example, and other providers. Yeah. Well, the moment you're getting into these types of providers, telemedicine providers, if you will, you now have to worry about, well, are you subjecting yourself to FTC rules? The TCPA rules. So if you are texting people, reminding them to take their medication, but what are the implications of that? Because TCPA rules apply. It's one of the most litigated areas right now, if I read that somewhere. Obviously, this week, we found out that there are prosecutions happening because of exposure to the Open Payments, or the Sunshine Act, basically. Mm-hmm. So the DOJ, the OIG are looking at that, and this is where reimbursement comes in, and you're going to tell me all about all the reasons why this is confusing at best. You now have to, these doctors are working as a result of you directing potential patients to them. Do they now feel like they have to prescribe your drug? Do they now prescribe your drug for an off-label indication after you've sent them the patient? Do they now have to worry, like, do you have to train them, and what do you train them on? All of which become concerning issues. You get into things like chatbots and email campaigns and testimonials and influencer ads and so much more. But to the point you were asking like 5 minutes ago, these are all the levers and the issues with DTP that people
spotted a lot of issues.
Yeah. So, but here's the question I have for you, Stephanie. Most of them have gone direct to patient with cash pay options. Yesterday for the first time, I saw, let us talk to your insurance company and we'll see if we can pay for GLP-1s in that case. And I thought that was really interesting. So talk to me about what the logic is. Why are certain decisions being made?
Yeah, and that's the point. That's where I get lost in the EO as well, right? Because I've had a lot of familiarity with cash pay programs. I mean, I think with Novo and Lilly announcing theirs, it's gotten a lot more attention and press, but they've existed historically, especially around lifestyle drugs. We saw it with the erectile dysfunction units, a lot of women's health products. And, another area where you see a lot of direct to patient programs is like older thyroid meds, because I think there's less coverage of them because there's more generics, but people they're like, it's one of those sets where if you're stabilized on it, you don't want to mess with it. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of direct to patient programs there, but they, as you rightfully point out, are cash pay programs. The pitfalls that you run into are all the things that you've brought up, including, in my mind, kickback concerns, right? To the extent you're letting a Medicare or Medicaid, really Medicare beneficiary, tap into a cash pay program, are they then going to turn around and try to seek reimbursement? Is there going to be some sort of Medicare tie-in to some of those programs? And how would that work? And for that reason, a lot of manufacturers, I think, historically have said, if you have Medicaid coverage, federal healthcare program coverage at all, you can't use our cash pay program because they're just worried about the kickback tie-ins. But the executive order, I mean, it's void of details. But if you're thinking about what is the administration's authority, I guess they have some ability to regulate commercial business through the Department of Labor under kind of a ERISA angle. And then it's Medicare or Medicaid. So how do you structure a cash pay program that you're going to want a Medicare beneficiary to participate in. And that's where I wrestle with the detail, right? And perhaps it could be some sort of a demo where maybe they could get us, I don't know, like part of their premium they could use, or some sort of, like some part of piece of the benefit could be set aside for a cash pay program and they could use it for that. But that's not really how we are currently processing either just fee for service Medicare Part B. We're just processing claims, and D is more of a a defined benefit plan, kind of defined by statutorily, even though it's privately administered. So it's very kind of odd. It's hard to wrap your head around where we think the administration is going, other than thinking that it's only fair if Medicare beneficiaries get the advantage of MFPs in the context of the IRA, right? Maximum fair prices, or perhaps MFNs under this executive order, that maybe it should be everybody else should get that benefit as well. And that concept, I think, is a good one. I think the devil is always in the details, and I can't wrap my head around how I'm envisioning it working.
So I'll tell you the question I'm struggling with. I don't fully understand the logic of. So the idea of this most favored nation status, you as the pharma company deal directly with the patient, cut out the middlemen, no PBMs, therefore you can drop the cost. This is great.
Right.
It reminds me of this argument, and the argument is that your drug costs will lower. And therefore everyone's happy with that, except the PBMs. But we don't have to worry about them. As a concept, that sounds great. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what you're telling me. I should now, as the patient, pay cash for a drug that I can get for a quote unquote cheaper price from the drug company. That sounds great as a concept, but that's in addition to what I'm already paying for my healthcare benefits anyways, which means that the healthcare company, the PBM in this case, or the insurance company, is happy for you to do it because it's not coming out of their pockets anymore. So it's an additional cost for the patient.
Right.
With this idea that it's patient empowerment, every time I've been empowered, I feel like I lost something. So it worries me when someone says you're empowered to now get your drugs at a cheaper cost. You know what's cheaper than this? Zero, because my PBM was covering this before. And it's not. So what is the logic here? Can this question be solved? Because that's what Mark Cuban was trying to do, right? He was trying to drop drug costs by cutting out the PBMs. But what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean this is exactly kind of the point I was trying to make. What I struggle with is if you're a Medicare D patient and you want to be driven, they want to steer you into these direct to patient programs. Why are you paying your premium to the Part D plan? So there has to be some sort of opt in, like maybe you opt into one of these programs and then you get a premium deduction or something like that. That's what I mean about the devil kind of being in the details on implementation. But I agree. And this ties into what a lot of the PBMs have been doing with those alternative funding plans or programs where they're saying, we're not going to cover this subset of drugs, but you can go enroll with our special vendor and they'll cover your drug for this much a year. But you have to use the copay card up to the full value. And we'll take that. We'll take part of that. Like that's kind of the same thing. So it goes in my mind, why are you paying the premiums when they're getting the benefit of these and it can happen even with free good programs. They'll screen you for a free good program and they'll say, we won't cover your drug if you could have got the drug for free from the manufacturer's program. We'll cover it only after the fact. And it begs the question to me again, what are they paying for the premium? It's like you're paying double, you're paying more. You're just paying it to a different person. Instead of your health premium going up, you're just paying for your drug separately. And that doesn't make any sense for consumers. And that can't be what the administration, I think, is getting to.
Okay.
If the idea is to lower drug pricing, it's got to be lower drug pricing for everyone, including the patient themselves.
Right. It's lower drug pricing for everyone except the patient in this scenario, which
that doesn't work.
Correct. Here's the other part that I think the world forgets. I'm not a PBM apologizer. I've worked with PBMs, worked for PBMs as one of my rotations at one point. But the logic of this sort of escapes me, where they go, you know what's great? If we get rid of these PBMs from this entire system because they aren't adding value and they're taking money off the top. And I go, look, let's be clear that maybe PBMs are profiting a little bit too much and they've sort of stacked the deck. Let's concede that point for a second. But they exist for a particular reason. And the reason they exist is because there were too many excesses where either pharma was paying doctors for whatever reason, that whether it was kickback or not, we're going back decades at this point. Doctors were inappropriately prescribing drugs that they shouldn't have been getting for the patients. You weren't going up the entire value chain going, you know what, if you're allergic, maybe you should start with the Benadryl. You don't need a Zofran every single time. You don't need an ondansetron every single time. And those types of discussions needed to be had. Yes. And what we're saying is, let's get rid of the only traffic cop in the way so that those conversations can happen faster. And yes, that is good from a patient standpoint, but is it really benefiting drug costs, which is what we were trying to address in the beginning? So what is the big pushback you've heard in that world? Like, should we get rid of PBMs? Because that's what the administration's saying. FTC is going after them, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we're finally seeing some scrutiny on PBMs. I mean, I think I can't remember what the statistic is, but the big three, right, control like 90% of the lives in the United States or something like that from a pharmacy standpoint. I mean, maybe they've gotten too big. The captive mail order pharmacies and the driving for certain specialty drugs and products to their own pharmacies certainly is a financial benefit to them. So you've got some kind of perverse incentives, but I completely agree with you. I think the role of the PBM early on was the only traffic cop. And they have value, and it's some of it's basic value. Like if we have all these direct to patient programs, we're going to lose the claims history and that database and there are, you as you know, like safeguards in that claims data where they're looking for drug interactions and things like that. We're going to lose some of the safeguards that we have in the system, as well as the repository of information. And we obviously have a very bifurcated medical system here in the United States. It's part of your records everywhere. But the one nice thing was that your drug record was all in one place. And if you're going to a direct to patient program over here for one thing and over there, it's not going to be all in one place. So we're losing that. And you would be losing, they do have pharmacy and therapeutics committees that look at drugs. They evaluate them for safety as well as efficacy and cost effectiveness.
I've sat on them.
All as an overall, and there is value to that. So we've got an industry where I think there could be more regulation and safeguards around some of their practices, but I don't think we just completely eliminate them. I don't think that's going to make our health system more efficient. And I don't necessarily think yes, maybe some of the fees that they charge along the line, if they went away, would that help lower prices? Maybe it could, because then manufacturers aren't worried about having to pay those fees. But, all in all, I don't think it's completely, it's not one player's fault. I don't think in any of this conversation. There's a lot of forces at play.
I have a really easy question that I think we can end this conversation on, because we've already run out of time, which is crazy to me. I walked away previously looking at these cash pay systems with the idea that there's a cash pay system because there's no way to do any kind of insurance coverage or Medicare, Medicaid coverage or the like. Based on what I'm hearing you say, the devil's in the details, but it's possible with the right structure. Is that accurate?
It's not going to adjudicate in the standard sense, right? Okay. Because unless the MFN is going to be like an MFP, and MFP again is maximum fair price. Those are the negotiated prices we're getting under the IRA that'll start next year. That's going to be the actual price to a Medicare beneficiary at the pharmacy. But none of these direct to patient programs contemplate that being the Medicare price, right? So it's harder to see it implemented unless it somehow replaces reimbursement, right? Which I guess we could see. Or if you've got some sort of pool of money that under the programs that the administration controls, mainly Medicare, maybe Medicaid, maybe it replaces, they have a pool of money they can use for the direct to patient programs, kind of like outside of the Part D benefit or outside of the Medicaid benefit. I have heard ramblings that maybe the idea of the EO was that the MFN would replace pharmacy reimbursement for Medicaid patients. But you've got, that's even more complicated because you've got the states in the mix where and we had under the Affordable Care Act that it had to be actual acquisition cost based formulas. So there's a lot of detail that definitely needs to be flushed out. But the historic, when I think of direct to patient, I think of no reimbursement.
Okay.
Right. I mean, for today. So if that's going to evolve, we're going to need to see it evolve.
So let me ask you a different version of the same question. What are the major pitfalls you find yourself guiding people on around cash-based systems in this world?
Yeah, so I've set up several of these over the years, and in a way, the one point of direct to patient sales can be desirable to manufacturers in a certain instance because they're excluded from best price and they're excluded from average manufacturer price, which are calculations manufacturers submit when they participate in Medicaid and forms the basis of rebates. So it's nice to know, okay, we can set this price. And I think the idea was that they could set the price a little bit higher than the commercial price and it wasn't going to negatively impact things. So from that standpoint, they can be attractive. The pitfalls that I think of are, again, usually it's set up, they're not setting up their own pharmacy, they're partnering with a mail order, and it gets into all of the issues that you so eloquently described earlier, which is they're your agent. It's got to be your program. You got to set your price. They're getting a service fee, but they're your agents. If they're doing marketing or promoting, you've got to really control those materials from not only in an FDA lens, but from an FTC lens, which is commonly a consideration, especially for like copay cards and things like that, but also from just thinking about the kickback statute and how you can touch it and how you don't want to touch it. So.
Obviously, it's
I
loads
think
more
we'll
to
just
discuss.
see more and more of these programs,
I
even
expect
without the EO. I think, as you pointed out, I mean, Mark Cuban has been really vocal about them. So,
Stephanie, how can people reach you if they have questions about this?
well, thanks, Darshan. Yes. So, best way to reach me, my email is stephanie.trunk@afslaw.com. You can also find my bio on our website, and we also blog quite frequently. So you can always find more interesting articles on our blog. How about you, Darshan?
You can reach me using our phone, which is 302-252-6959, or you can actually email me directly at Darshan, Darshan, at kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's Kulkarni lawfirm.com. Stephanie, this was incredible, as always.
As
Thank
always.
you. I can't wait to do more of these,
I
so
know,
stay
I'm
tuned.
sure. We'll do another one. We'll be back with you soon. Another exciting topic.